Just moments ago, the streets of London exploded with a wave of anger, thousands of voices demanding that Keir Starmer step down now. The capital's heart is pulsing with unrest, and the government is under pressure like never before. The rally began innocently enough, but within hours it had grown into a scene of extraordinary scale. Thousands of demonstrators converged in central London, filling major thoroughfares, waving banners, chanting demands, and positioning themselves directly in the capital's political core. News outlets put the initial turnout at well over 100,000 people. The Straits Times +2, Dev Discourse +2 as the crowd poured in. The planned route became overwhelmed. City sidewalks, roads, open squares were all taken over by people intent on being heard, and the visual impact could not be ignored. The mood was electric, chants rising, placards held high, and a sense of urgency, of this can no longer wait, hung in the air. The protesters were making it clear they believe the leadership of Keir Starmer has failed them, and they are demanding change. Behind the slogans and banners lay deep-seated frustrations over migration policy, over public services, over what many feel is a widening gap between political elites and everyday citizens. Reports catching the scale of the event told of tens of thousands mobilized, swelling beyond expectations. Organizer +2 Dev Discourse +2 Law Enforcement, meanwhile, found themselves racing to keep pace, struggling to manage the sheer mass of people in a city center built for normal traffic, not for thousands to flood the streets in protest. The crowd's size, energy and direction created moments of uncertainty, making it clear this was no routine demonstration. It had the potential to mark a turning point. Visually, the scene was undeniable. Sea of flags and signs, roads choked with people, voices rising in unison. At one point, police units reported officers being injured as tensions escalated. The London Economic +1. This protest did not just sort of happen, it broke out, it grew fast, and it demanded attention. As cameras and phones captured the event, the message sent was unmistakable. This is a public outcry, not a fringe movement. For the rest of the country, the message was clear. The capital's streets are no longer quiet when grievances go unheard, and the leadership in Westminster is going to feel the heat. The protest isn't just about one speech or one policy, it's the result of months of frustration boiling over. For many people in the crowd, this was the last straw. They say they've been unheard, ignored, and left behind by decisions coming out of Westminster. In their view, Keir Starmer's government has drifted too far from the promises that brought it into power, promises of stability, fairness, and a stronger future for ordinary people. That's the chance of Starmer must go, echoed through the streets. It wasn't just anger in those voices, it was disappointment. Some protesters held signs reading, "We believed in change and you failed us." Others carried pictures of struggling families and workers, calling attention to the rising cost of living, housing shortages, and failing public services. Every chant, every poster told a story of betrayal, a growing feeling that politics has become disconnected from real life. One man, holding a torn Labour Party flag, shouted to cameras, "We voted for hope and got chaos." That moment spread quickly across social media, symbolizing how public sentiment has shifted. Online, clips of the protests began trending within minutes. Hashtags like #StarmerResign and #LondonProtest shot to the top of platforms like X and TikTok. Within an hour, millions had seen the crowds, and the debate exploded far beyond the streets. Many protesters spoke about the government's handling of immigration, claiming that it has fueled division instead of unity. Others pointed to public sector cuts, the shortage of nurses, teachers, and affordable housing. The message from the marchers was simple: enough is enough. This wasn't just about politics, it was about people struggling to make ends meet while watching leaders argue and stall. As night began to fall, the crowd's energy didn't die down. Instead, it grew more intense. Flares lit up the sky, chants grew louder, and the police presence increased. Officers in riot gear formed lines near key government buildings as tensions mounted. But still, the protesters refused to leave. "We're not moving until Starmer does," one group shouted, linking arms in front of Downing Street. By this point, London had turned into a sea of sound and motion, a wave of public frustration that felt unstoppable. The chants weren't just noise, they were a warning. People were sending a message directly to the highest office in the country. Leadership that ignores its people will eventually face its people. And for Keir Starmer, this wasn't just another protest, it was a political earthquake, a clear sign that the trust he once held is slipping fast, and that the public's patience may finally have run out. As darkness fell over London, the protest took a tense and dramatic turn. What began as loud but peaceful chanting soon turned into scenes of chaos. The crowds, swelling to tens of thousands, filled Westminster's narrow streets, pushing toward Downing Street and Parliament Square. Police lines struggled to contain the growing wave of demonstrators. Sirens echoed, helicopters circled above, and the air was thick with tension. The city, that usually buzzes with tourists and traffic, had transformed into the epicenter of political fury. Eyewitnesses reported moments of confrontation. Flares and smoke bombs lit up the skyline in bright red and orange hues, casting dramatic shadows over the historic buildings. Officers in high-visibility jackets formed barricades, shouting warnings through megaphones for protesters to stay back. But the chants only grew louder. Starmer out. Starmer out. The message was defiant, the mood unyielding. Every corner of Westminster seemed to rumble with voices demanding one thing: resignation. As pressure mounted, reports began surfacing of scuffles between protesters and police. Some groups tried to push past barriers. Others sat on the ground in organized resistance, refusing to move. A handful of individuals threw bottles and fireworks, prompting officers to advance with shields raised. Within minutes, riot police were deployed, tightening control over Parliament Square and blocking key exits to prevent the unrest from spreading. The police response was firm but cautious. Authorities knew the world was watching. Cameras from international news outlets lined the streets, broadcasting the chaos live. Officers were ordered to show restraint, but as the crowd surged again, that became increasingly difficult. Dozens of people were detained. Several officers were treated for minor injuries. Still, compared to earlier unrests, the coordination between units remained controlled, though the atmosphere was undeniably volatile. Meanwhile, social media was ablaze. Videos of clashes flooded feeds with captions like "Land on erupts" and "Protest out of control." Hashtags demanding accountability for both the government and law enforcement began trending simultaneously. Commentators online argued over whether the police had acted too aggressively or not fast enough. Within hours, the story had gone global. International networks picked it up, painting a picture of a government under siege in its own capital. Inside Downing Street, sources described a sense of urgency and unease. Advisors were reportedly locked in late-night meetings, monitoring live footage and social sentiment in real time. Some ministers called for calm, while others pressed Starmer to issue an emergency statement to cool public anger. But for many outside, words were no longer enough. They wanted to see action, and they wanted it now. By midnight, the protest had become a full-scale standoff. The rhythmic sound of drums and chants blended with the hum of police radios and helicopter blades. London hadn't seen a political protest of this magnitude in years. What made it different was its energy, raw, determined, and deeply personal. People weren't just opposing a policy. They were calling out a leader they felt had lost his way. The capital stood divided between authority and outrage, between calm and chaos. But one thing was certain: this was no longer just a protest. It was a message written in the streets, shouted by thousands, and impossible to ignore. By dawn, the fires of protest had dimmed, but the aftershocks were only beginning. London woke up to images of smashed barriers, exhausted protesters, and police cordons still blocking parts of Westminster. The capital looked bruised, not destroyed, but deeply shaken. What had started as a spontaneous rally had grown into one of the largest demonstrations the country had seen in years. Now, the political and social consequences were beginning to unfold. Within hours, the media erupted with headlines: "London in revolt," "Starmer under siege," and "Crisis in No. 10." News channels replayed dramatic footage of chanting crowds, clashes with police, and angry faces demanding change. Political analysts described the protest as a wake-up call, a loud, unmistakable message that public trust had reached breaking point. On talk shows and social platforms, one question dominated: can Keir Starmer survive this? Behind closed doors, the mood in government was grim. Sources described emergency meetings stretching through the night. Senior Labour MPs reportedly urged the Prime Minister to address the nation before anger could spiral further. Some called for humility and dialogue. Others whispered about damage control and leadership challenges. The tension wasn't just in the streets anymore. It had entered the corridors of power. Meanwhile, the opposition seized the moment. Conservative and Reform Party figures publicly criticized Starmer's leadership, saying the chaos proved he'd lost the people's confidence. Even within Labour ranks, rumblings began. Backbenchers spoke of disconnection from the base and failing to listen. The pressure to respond decisively mounted by the hour. Starmer himself remained silent for most of the morning, fueling speculation that he was unsure of how to contain the political firestorm that had engulfed his government. Outside Parliament, remnants of the protests lingered, small groups still chanting, streets littered with placards reading "Resign now." For many who had marched, it wasn't just about seeing their leader step down. It was about reclaiming their voice in a system they believed had stopped hearing them. Interviews with participants revealed a mix of anger and exhaustion, but also pride in standing up, in being seen, in showing that ordinary citizens could still shake the foundations of power. By midday, Starmer finally broke his silence. Standing at a podium with tired eyes and a strained voice, he condemned the violence but defended the people's right to protest. His tone was cautious, a balancing act between authority and empathy. He promised to listen more and work to restore trust, but for many it was too little, too late. The damage had been done not only to his image but to the fragile connection between the government and the governed. Political experts now warn that this protest could mark a turning point. Some predict cabinet reshuffles or early elections. Others suggest a long period of instability as the government tries to regain control of the narrative. What's certain is that this wasn't just a protest, it was a reckoning, the kind that changes how a nation sees its leaders. And as London slowly returns to its rhythm, one truth remains clear: the sound of those thousands chanting through the night will not be forgotten anytime soon. Whether it brings real change or just another political storm, the message from the streets has been delivered loud, raw, and impossible to ignore.